All right, let's just dive right in. I want you to picture this scene. The legendary leader Joshua, a man who has led his people through some incredible conquests and miracles, is now at the very end of his life. The wars, they're pretty much over, but his last fight, well, it wasn't with swords. It was a battle for the very heart and soul of his nation. And this is the story of his final, brilliant gambit.
And it all leads up to this one super famous line. I mean, you've probably seen this on a plaque or a decoration in someone's house, right? It's one of the most well-known declarations of faith in the entire Bible. It just feels so strong, so confident, so pure.
But here's the thing. What if that beautiful statement wasn't just a simple, happy declaration of faith? What if it was actually the climax of this super tense, dramatic confrontation, all because the people were hiding a pretty big secret? Yeah, there's a much, much deeper story going on here.
So to really get what's going on, you got to look at what Joshua does right at the end. The land is settled, and he knows his time is running out. To try and lock in Israel's future loyalty to God, he doesn't just give one speech. Nope, he gives two.
And this is where it starts to get really interesting. You know, for a long time, scholars kind of scratched their heads about why the text has two completely separate farewell speeches, one in chapter 23 and another in chapter 24. Were they just, different versions of the same event? Well, the evidence points to something way more deliberate.
See, when you put them side by side, it becomes super clear. These weren't just two tellings of one speech. They were two totally separate events, like a strategic one-two punch designed for maximum impact. Joshua knew exactly what he was doing. And you can really see that strategy when you break it down like this. The first speech, that's in chapter 23. It's kind of informal, more like a heartfelt chat just with the nation's leaders, probably at Shiloh. It was a private, personal appeal. But then you get to the second one in chapter 24. Wow, it's a completely different vibe. This one is a big, formal, highly structured ceremony for all the tribes of Israel, gathered at a place called Shechem. This was the main event, the national moment of truth.
So what was he trying to get across in these speeches? What was the core message? Well, Joshua wasn't just asking them to, believe in God casually. He was begging them for this radical, all-in kind of loyalty, and he sums it all up with one incredibly powerful Hebrew word.
That word is dabak. And this word, it's intense. It doesn't just mean to follow or to hold on to. It literally means to be glued to something, to cling to it with a grip you just can't break. It's actually the same word used way back in Genesis to describe how a husband and wife should cling to each other. So yeah, it's serious stuff. And to help us really get what this word means, the source material has this amazing little story. The author talks about a pet monkey he knew as a kid that snatched his absolute favorite pen. This little monkey just bolts up a tree with it. And when they finally got the monkey down, he says he could barely pry that pen out of its little hand. I mean, that monkey was not letting go.
And that right there, that's the whole point. That monkey's unbreakable grip on the pen, that is dabak. That is the kind of fierce, unwavering, I'm glued to you relationship that Joshua was demanding the people have with God. Anything less just wasn't going to cut it. Okay, so that brings us to the big showdown at Shechem, that formal ceremony with the whole nation. Joshua has set the stage, right? And now he's about to pull the curtain back and reveal why this whole urgent cling to God message was so necessary. He's about to expose their big secret.
Because here's the hidden failure, the thing Joshua is calling out. After everything they'd seen, all the miracles, the victory at Jericho, getting the promised land, a lot of the Israelites were still, they were hedging their bets. He basically calls them out for flirting with three different sets of foreign gods. The old gods their ancestors knew back in Mesopotamia, the gods from their time in Egypt, and even the gods of the Canaanites who were living right there in the land with them.
And boom, suddenly, that famous line hits with the force of a bomb. This isn't just some gentle, feel-good statement of faith anymore, right? This is an ultimatum. Joshua is literally drawing a line in the sand. He's looking at them and saying, look, you can have those gods, or you can have the Lord. But you can't have both. So right here, right now, choose.
So the people, they respond just like you'd hope. They'd declare, no, we'll serve the Lord. But then Joshua says something that is just absolutely stunning. He looks right at them and says, you will not be able to serve the Lord. I mean, what? One expert actually calls this the most shocking statement in the entire Old Testament. Why on earth would he say that?
Well, it wasn't a curse or anything like that. Think of it more like a rhetorical shock and awe tactic.
Joshua knew they were making this promise way too easily, probably while still secretly thinking about those other idols. So he hits him with, "You can't do it," to force them to stop and really think about the unbelievable holiness of God and what it truly means to be committed. It was a massive wake-up call.
And it works. The wake-up call lands. The people double down on their promise, and the crisis is handled, for now. But as the book of Joshua wraps up, it leaves us with this feeling of finality and maybe a few unsettling clues about what's coming next.
So, in response to this, the people say, "No, really, we mean it." And Joshua makes it official. He writes it all down in a book, and then, and this is so important, he sets up a huge stone right there as a silent, permanent witness to the promise they just made. It's like a physical reminder for everyone, for all time.
And then, just like that, the era comes to a close, with 3 funerals. Joshua dies at 110, and then there's this really beautiful moment where the bones of Joseph, which they carried all the way from Egypt for hundreds of years, are finally buried in the Promised Land. It's this incredible symbol of God keeping his promises over centuries. And finally, Eleazar the high priest also dies. The entire generation of original leaders, they're all gone.
But there is some really good news here. The text makes a point to tell us that Joshua's last-ditch effort totally worked. It says that for a whole generation, all the days of Joshua and the elders who outlived him, the people stayed faithful. The covenant actually held.
But the book ends with this quiet, kind of tense feeling. Yeah, that generation was faithful, but think about it. Moses spent years grooming Joshua to take over. Joshua, for all his incredible leadership, never names a successor. And that leaves us with a really chilling question. What happens to a nation when its great leader is gone and there's absolutely no one to take his place? Well, the very next book in the Bible, the book of Judges, gives us the very chaotic and very dark answer to that question.